Today I'm here to talk about sacral fracture management as well as sort of the basic classification of the sacrum and the pelvic injuries or lumbosacral injuries. I have no disclosures. So the learning objective is to describe the pertinent sacral anatomy and classifications as well as identify the treatment plans. I think sacral fractures tend to be very unique in the sense that a lot of them tend to be very high energy injuries, and they tend to be sort of multi-organ system injuries when these patients come in. So that poses unique challenges in terms of their management. So we'll talk about the functional anatomy, the evaluation, the classification scheme, as well as the treatment. So this is a picture of the sacrum, as you can see, and so these foramina are basically the ventral foramina of S1, S2, S3, and S4. On the dorsal surface, something to keep in mind that these are the dorsal foramina, and oftentimes we'll expose the sacrum without really thinking about sort of the posterior nerves that are coming out. But there's definitely middle cluneal nerves that are coming out of these foramina. So whenever you're doing a sacropelvic fixation, like an S2 alar screw instrumentation, you're definitely denervating the posterior buttocks. So just something to keep in mind. And for whatever reason, if you're down below here, sort of doing either a distal sacrectomy or a coccygectomy for whatever reason, that's the sacral hiatus where the S5 as well as the coccygeal nerves root comes out. So this would be a place to not come down sort of midline with your bovie to expose in order to tag those nerves as you're doing the exposure. So if you look at the sacral anatomy, there's 5 fused segments. There's a varying degree of kyphosis. The transverse processes are fused and form the sacral ala up top. And as mentioned before, there's the anterior foramen, which is much more functionally significant. As you guys know, the S2, the S4 foramen are responsible for bowel bladder function. Depending on patient variability, sometimes the S2 foramen is responsible for toe plantar flexion. The S1 foramen, or S1 nerve, is definitely responsible for ankle plantar flexion. The posterior roots don't really have motor significance, but definitely do have sensory innervation. The middle cluneal nerves coming from S2 to S4. Again, when we expose that, we're definitely denervating that. So as Dr. Chapman had mentioned, the sacrum is the keystone of the pelvic ring. It basically is the posterior arch of the pelvic ring. It serves as a platform for the lumbar spine. It's basically the PI determines the lumbar lordosis, as you guys know. And then obviously it also serves as a central structure to transfer the stress from the spine to the hips through the S1 and S2. So it turns out there's a lot of significant ligamentous attachments that get injured as part of the sacral trauma. These are basically the sacrotuberous ligaments. There's the sacrospinous ligaments. There's the iliolumbar ligaments. There's a lot of these ligaments that get injured that hold everything in place. It's not something that we think about when we evaluate a bony CT. And in terms of the greatest bony density for fixation, the reason why we try to aim for the sacropromontory for S1 pedicle screws is that that's obviously the greatest bone density. It's also being proven to be safe. The thecal sac termination of this, the spine can be a little bit variable, but it tends to end at S2-3 or S2. Typically, the L5, the transverse process rides over sacral ala as you're doing that exposure, and the L4 to S1 nerve roots form the lumbosacral plexus, and the S2 to S4 nerve roots form the sacral plexus. So when we're evaluating a patient for sacral fractures, we want to have a really high degree of suspicion. Oftentimes they're missed, particularly on plain x-rays. Obviously, these are high energy mechanisms. You want to make sure that you follow the ATLS guidelines for management of these patients. So in terms of when we're looking for, what are we looking for when we're looking at sacral plane films? We're looking for potential signs of bony instability, soft tissue injury. You want to evaluate their neurological exam, which is a little bit tricky for the sacral nerve roots. You also want to do a rectal and vaginal exam to make sure that there's not an injury to these viscous organs. This is particularly important when the patient has a segmentation defect and they have a really long coccyx, like they have extra coccygeal segments. Those patients are at higher risk for having a rectal perforation during times of the sacral trauma. So classically, we've got an AP pelvis views, inlet-outlet views, CT scans, as well as lateral sacral x-rays. I think for most trauma centers, everyone pretty much gets pan scan along the way, so a lot of these x-rays have fallen out of favor. But that being said, there's still a lot that you can learn from these x-rays. So just looking at this x-ray, you can already, just right off the bat, tell that the sacral ring is really not in one piece. You can see that there's disturbance of the anterior sacral ring. You can see that there's a fracture to the ilium. You can see that the S2 frame, and there's definitely some suggestion of extension to the spinal canal as well. And finally, there's also a lower fracture through the body of S3. So you can tell all this from just a plain AP pelvis x-ray. Now, in terms of getting the pelvic inlet view, this is a good view to figure out whether there's actually anterior-posterior displacement of the pelvic ring, and that has implications in terms of what type of treatment you're choosing in order to reconstruct the pelvic ring. So that's sort of the angle that you get for the pelvic inlet view. And this is a pelvic outlet view, which is basically orthogonal to the pelvic inlet view. And again, this also allows you to assess for the superior migration, particularly if you're looking at the iliac crest as it sits to the femur. And again, this is pretty much orthogonal just to the inlet view. So again, the reason why CTs have become the standard for all these is that on lateral sacral imaging, it's actually very hard, it's very easy to miss fractures. And this is the same patient where on lateral sacral imaging, it's really hard to see whether there's some type of fracture, but on the actual CT, you can see that there's actually a significant transverse zone 1 injury through the sacrum. So in terms of the classification of sacral fractures, the key thing is that we want to understand the integrity of the pelvic ring, we want to understand the integrity of the lumbosacral junction, and finally we also want to understand the integrity of the sacrum itself. And the reason why these are important is because these have implications on your treatment, as well as the prediction of the type of neurological injury that the patient's going to have, as well as predict the recovery pattern. And the key is that it turns out that there's not a lot of, compared to, I don't know how the experts in the front two rows feel about this, but compared to sort of like cervical cord injury, thoracic cord injury, there's a lot of variation in what people use in terms of how to classify sacral injuries in terms of the neurological deficits. I think the most commonly used scales is that Gibbons scale, where the grade 1 is normal, grade 2 you have some impaired sensation, 3 you have some motor deficits, and as well as loss of bowel bladder function, and 4 obviously complete absent bowel and bladder function. So if you look at the actual sacral fractures, so we're talking about now in the coronal plane. Okay, so for a Dennis zone 1 injury, it's basically lateral to the foramen. It's about 50% of your sacral fractures, and very rarely is there neurological involvement, only 6% of the time. If you look at zone 2 injuries, these are through the foramen. They're a little bit less common. They're 34% of all sacral fractures. And about a third of the time there's neurological involvement, but these tend to be radiculopathies. And finally, the most significant is these Dennis zone 3 fractures, where they're actually medial to the foramen. It extends into the spinal canal at its termination at S2-3, and more than half of them have some type of motor deficit, and 3/4 of them have some dysfunction of bowel and bladder. So there's different types of zone 3 injury patterns. I'm sure people have seen this diagram in terms of ways to describe it, like H fractures, U fractures, lambda, just based off of sort of how these fractures look. But more importantly is actually the coronal orientation of the fracture. This is basically the Royal Camille modification and looking at the sagittal plane in terms of what is the mechanism of injury. And a Roy Camille A is basically a flexion injury without translation. A Roy Camille B is a flexion injury with translation. A Roy Camille C is an extension. And finally, the D is an axial loading mechanism type injury with comminuted segments of the S1 vertebrae. And these generally all tend to predict sort of a degree of neurological severity. And the next part you want to understand is sort of the lumbosacral instability. And this is the Isler lumbosacral modification. But if you take a look, class A injuries are lateral to the lumbosacral facet. They don't really actually go into the joint, so there's no lumbosacral instability. Type B injuries are through the facet itself. It may or may not be unstable depending on the lateral views as well as the extent that it disrupts the facet, whereas type C injuries, similar, where it actually does extend into the canal, and these are uniformly considered unstable. So in terms of looking at the sacral fractures, we're talking about the deformity. We want to stabilize it. We want to address the neurological symptoms, and we want to treat the associated injuries. In terms of the surgical treatment options, we want to definitely decompress. We want to reduce the fracture. We want to stabilize. So the concept of decompression is very controversial because there's older papers that have been published about 10, 15 years ago that claim that there's an 80% improvement in the neurological symptoms, irrespective of what happens. So conservative management, bracing the patient. I think these are challenging because, as I just talked about, there's not really an agreed upon scale for classifying sacral injuries. So a lot of the older studies were just basically looking at retrospective chart reviews, looking at whether they had improved bowel bladder function. And in the acute trauma setting, I think it's very hard to assess for exactly where their level of injuries are in the sacrum, because they come in, they automatically have a Foley catheter, sometimes their mental status is depressed. It's very hard to specifically address for perineal sensation or bulbocavernosus reflux or an anal wink. So all these are very hard in the acute trauma setting. So take that with a grain of salt that this 80% improvement is regardless of the treatment. A high percentage of these patients have nerve root avulsion. If you test their sensory dermatomes carefully, they definitely do have nerve avulsion. In terms of direct versus indirect decompression, as an institution, we do tend to favor direct decompression. And there's some studies out there that show that early decompression is beneficial. However, like I mentioned, a lot of these patients have pelvic bleeding. They may need preoperative embolization. So the timing of the surgery is really depending on the overall systemic status of the patient. And typically sort of Dennis zone 3 injuries extending to the spinal canal with actual either translation anteriorly, translation and extension, or burst fractures typically will require some type of an open surgical treatment in order to stabilize their sacrum and pelvis. And again, these are the associated injury patterns in these types of injuries. You can see that a lot of them have spinal cord injury, other spinal fractures, anterior pelvic ring fractures, head injuries, thoracic injuries, abdominal injuries. So a lot of the time, your timing of surgery is highly depending on your trauma surgeons and sort of triaging sort of the other associated injuries that the patients have. So in terms of the sacral fracture treatment, I think this is the most straightforward. These are unfortunate fluoroscopy reviews. We tend to use the Excelsius robot for these cases now, but basically I think these are good for your sort of low-grade injuries where you're talking about Dennis zone 1, zone 2, or perhaps even a zone 3 injury with just minimal displacement. And basically this is sort of you're essentially akin to like an SI joint fusion where we're just trying to reconstruct the pelvic ring. So this is a lot more extensive in terms of, so when patients have this type of open door fracture where you have disruption of the pelvic ring, that's when you start using these monoiliac screws and try to use these different techniques in terms to, with regards to closing the pelvic ring. And these are when, again, oftentimes they'll actually need to be temporized with some type of pelvic binder and femoral traction first to stabilize the patient before taking the patient to the OR for reconstruction of their pelvic ring. So this is sort of an example where the patient has a unilateral sort of complex zone 2, zone 3 type injury where essentially it was a combination approach from reconstructing the superior portion with an SI screw with a lower sort of like an S2 iliac screw type construct and extending it up to L5 in order to reconstruct that unilateral injury. Oh, and one thing is that a lot of these patients, the biggest complications of these types of surgeries is actually wound healing. Oftentimes they have some type of degloving injury. The wound complication rates can be up to 30–40% for these type of open pelvic ring reconstructions. And in terms of non-surgical management, I defer to the experts in the front 2 rows, but I do think it's fallen out of favor. These are relying on activity modifications with prolonged bed rest intensive skeletal traction or TLSO brace with a femoral spica. These obviously, as we understand these spinal cord injuries more, I mean, there's significant morbidity in keeping the patient in prolonged recumbency positions, including PE, pulmonary complications, skin breakdown. So generally, if there's consideration for, if there's issues with the pelvic stability, that's an issue, we tend to favor taking these patients to the OR. So the conclusions, the sacral fractures are a very heterogeneous entity. It's with possible involvement of the pelvic ring and lumbosacral junction. Obviously for low-grade fractures, we can consider sort of non-operative management. Definitely for high-grade fractures, really, I think it's very clear that open decompression and segmental stabilization is what these patients need. And the ideal timing of the surgery, I think intuitively it makes sense that the earlier is better within 2 weeks. However, again, a lot of it is really limited by their systemic injuries. So it's a case-by-case basis with evaluation with the trauma surgeons. All right, thank you very much.
So very good, thank you. So the big question in terms of osteoporotic patients now is under-recognized sacral insufficiency fracture.
Right.
Upon in the beginning. So a couple of tips and tricks from your end in terms of how to avoid this conundrum of these older people who come with increasing back pain
Right.
and are then suddenly kyphosing over, whether
Right.
they had previous surgery above or not, doesn't matter. So how do you treat those? How do you assess those?
So generally speaking, if the patients have a low, really truly low back pain past the lumbosacral junction, not into the buttocks but midline, it's our institutional practice to actually, when we get the lumbar CT, we actually go down, have the radiologists go down all the way into the sacrum as well. And we have very good neurointerventional radiologists that are very aggressive about sacroplasties. So oftentimes, because we want to avoid sort of that sacral insufficiency fracture getting kyphotic or subluxing, we're very aggressive about sending them to neuro IR to get sacroplasties.
Yeah. Where do they actually inject the cement? What anatomic structure, do you know?
I'm not exactly sure, but they do it. It's like the guy who does it, his name is Majid Khan, but it's like a Da Vinci thing. Like he actually like stages it in multiple procedures, and he actually makes like a cement structure that looks like a sacrum. So it's actually pretty impressive. I do believe that what he does is he basically goes through posteriorly, through not through the lamina, but laterally, kind of transpedicular, and then fills in, sort of does it in stages where he basically does one side, makes sure it settles, and then comes on a separate day to the other side. It ends up being sort of like a multi-day procedure, but it tends to work pretty well.
Actually inject this, fill up the sacral ala.
Yes.
And so the one problem that I have with that is then if you have to do a repeat surgery, it becomes a very big mess. And so I'm also not sure how well they actually hold or withstand the actual biomechanical stresses. Interesting that it's not been studied very well. So this is one of those things I'm not sure about, that we should abdicate that to interventionalists. Tim?
Yeah, so I think one of the big issues with these are what's the nature of the injury in an elderly patient? Is if it's a pelvic ring injury with a zone 1 or zone 2, that's different than somebody that has a sacral U, and sometimes they're difficult to distinguish in an older patient, and sometimes the sacral U will displace or not displace. So that's one of the difficulties with a sacral fracture in an older patient.
Right.
And where you put the bone cement, if you're going to do a sacroplasty, I think is important. But I think, and the way we've done is we've put the bone cement, injecting it posteriorly in the axis of the vertical fracture line. Okay. And then sometimes we'll put iliosacral screw fixation in addition to that at the same time. But that's different options. And unfortunately, we don't have a great understanding about when these are structurally unstable and going to progress, or when they're just something that, given time and given a fragility fracture, management with addressing their osteoporosis and expecting they'll gradually improve, that will be adequate. So that's some of the problems with these fractures, is trying to treat them. And lastly, the thing that, things that do push us to be more aggressive is if we do see a pattern that's a sacral fracture below a multi-segment fusion surgery, those are more likely to be unstable, more likely to be something that needs to be aggressively treated, because the moment arm's so significant. I mean, there's a difference between a sacral fracture that's unstable in the vertical plane with a flexion distraction kind of mechanism versus a pelvic ring sacral fracture where you don't have the spinal column instability.
So yes, we have a new AO system here, sacral fractures. Let me give you're one of the first to have that card. So yes, we're trying to actually change this whole thing around. And yes, we popularized the other systems before, but this is internationally validated. We hope this will make a difference to simplify things into ABCs. But I think the key things are to have a very high index of suspicion when elderly people come into our practices with simple falls or not even a fall, and just start developing weird back pain. And again, the open conundrum for me is still when they have an MRI positive scan, but it's CT indiscriminate. I'm not sure what to do with those. So that's an open issue. We can maybe talk about that later in a second. Thank you for a great talk.